I mean, I've met people who say, I'm psychedelic, I know exactly what you're talking about, blah, blah. And you say, oh, well, what's your drug history? And you say, well, I took MDMA twice. You say, look, just because you've had a glass of cold water doesn't mean you are now ready to be food editor for the La Rus Gastronomique, my friend. I mean, there's more to it than that, believe me.
Mushrooms are my thing. I mean, they enlightened me, they straightened me out, they love me. But the way to do mushrooms is the very first move, if you're interested in mushrooms, is, for God's sake, buy a scale. Buy a scale. Because people don't take enough. People do not take enough mushrooms. They take pissant amounts, and you must take a measured 5 dried grams on an empty stomach. Measured. Psilocybin is your friend. It wants to teach. It will take you by the hand and forgive you and lead you and be with you. I've had over and over the experience of showing somebody what 5 grams is, and they're appalled. They say, my God, you can't be serious. I mean, I take a fifth that much, a fourth that much. Yeah, well, that's the problem. That's why you don't have elves in the attic and bats in the belfry like I do.
Where the problem area lies, people think it lies in taking too much. It lies in taking too little. Because if you take too little, you can resist it. You can struggle with it. And then it can turn into a real mess. What you want to do is take sufficiently enough that there's no escape, and that the transition from ordinary reality to fully loaded is as quick as possible, because the going up is somewhat terrifying. For example, let's use psilocybin as the model. Here's how it works for me. This is not tea. This is eating raw mushrooms. It comes on more slowly. So after an hour or so, and the way I do it is I sit as soon as the mushroom enters my body, I sit and meditate. I take the mushroom or the ayahuasca, and then I sit and I roll bombers. So I'll have them ready if I need them. And I just sit as I'm going to sit during the trip, and I've unplugged the telephone, and I've gotten everything squared away, and it begins to come on at about the 40-minute or the 60-minute mark, and there's sometimes some nausea as it comes on, and then I smoke a bomber or half a bomber, and then it catapults it into the full deployment of the thing, where you just hang on. There's about a 25-minute period where your only job is to hang on. It builds. It's like watching an atomic explosion on the other side of 50 feet of absolutely clear crystal glass. I mean, you can't believe this is happening, quote unquote, in my mind. You have the feeling that everybody from Seattle to San Diego has just crawled under their desk as this thing tore past, but it's in your mind. And then there is the interaction with it, which moment to moment you are pretty coherent, but you lose it. A lot of it does not transcribe into short-term memory. And then after about an hour or 40 minutes of that, it becomes more manageable, more memorable. The most mind-boggling parts of it are just not possible to bring out of it because language fails. Because English, there are no words. There are no words even close. I mean, sometimes you'll bring out an image or a metaphor, but out of 5 hours of tripping, you bring out, half a notebook page of metaphors, and yet you were entirely engage during that time. Now, this question about fear, which is a real question, because when everything begins to slide, if it's more than most people who haven't done it expect. They have heard it, they've read the books, but they think it's a metaphor. They don't understand it's really going to happen, and it's really going to happen to you. And there's a tendency to clutch or to try and resist it. The thing to do in those situations, I think, and it's counterintuitive to how Western people think, but the thing to do is to sing, to sit up, not to assume the fetal position. See, what you might tend to do is assume the fetal position and tell yourself, my God, this is the most appalling thing that's ever happened to me. If I can just live through it, it'll be all right. I've taken this drug. If I can just wait through. How long did they say it will be? 7 hours. I see it. It started 2 minutes ago. If I can just... No, the thing to do is to sit up and to sing. And why? Well, being practical people, to oxygenate your brain, to move this thing that's happened to you, though it may have one claw in heaven, its roots are in your neurophysiology and in the chemistry of the drug. You want to move your physiology around. So oxygenating your brain can't fail to do this. So you sing, and this almost always is accompanied by a sense of power, control, equilibrium, and so forth and so on. Not always. I mean, let's face it, you're a product of a nutty society, and there are unexamined crevices and uncleaned out drain traps in all of us, and you're going to encounter that stuff. The good news is the earlier psychedelic trips tend to deal with that. If you will quickly discover taking psychedelics that either you can work through your personal issues and become a psychedelic explorer, or this is just stronger medicine than you are up for, and you would be far better to go back to psychoanalysis or whatever works for you. Some people just can't take it. Why is that? Well, because what it does is it dissolves boundaries, and most of us are over boundary defined, but some of us are having an uphill battle getting some boundaries in place and realizing we are not the telephone or the tree or the person we live with. Cannabis. Yes, wonders. Often people wonder. You get into a place where it's so unfamiliar that the question comes up, have I done it this time? You know, am I dying or am I in danger? The answer is the odds are incredibly against you being seriously in danger. People don't die from psychedelics unless they have heart conditions or some incredibly rare medical condition. The problem is that the ego feels threatened by the boundary dissolution. And its ace is your self-identification with it. And it can actually say to you, you are dying. And here's the evidence. And you have to say, no, it's unlikely. And sing your way through it. But this is really tough. I mean, this is, the Buddhists talk about slaying the ego. This is slaying the ego for real. You must slay it, otherwise it will spread panic into your whole psychological system will give way to panic and hysteria. So unless there is some real reason to think you're dying, and you should have done your homework, you should know what to expect. For example, if you take LSD and begin intense bouts of vomiting, this is not a proper reaction to LSD. Something is wrong, either with the LSD or with your relationship to it. You should know what because a typical trip will put you through changes, but is not dangerous. But if you suddenly begin exhibiting some symptom, heart fibrillation or something like that, then you want to have. This is why then there's always the issue of the buddy system. Should there be somebody else there, and what about all that? My position is, if you're anxious, then you should have a sitter. If you're going to do it alone, you should certainly tell someone so that they will check on you after a while. I don't like doing it in groups or with sitters because inevitably I get spun into them. What I want to do is go as deep as possible and and even if I'm alone with one other person, culture is the third guest at the table. If you start, I've often found myself in the middle of psychedelic trips thinking, I'm sure glad there's nobody else here to see this, because I'm sure it would alarm an observer. Because I have my leg thrown back up over my neck and I'm screaming in Urdu or something. But it's okay. After a few minutes, it's okay. But if there were an observer, they would feel the need to do something, And often, like I've seen people smoking DMT, and people moan. And they say, no, no, no. And they moan, and so then, you get them back together and constituted, and you say, how was it? And they say, it was fantastic. So you realize, how they present is not reliable.
As far as DMT is concerned, ayahuasca is driven by DMT. What made me go to the Amazon was I first encountered DMT in the underground in Berkeley in 1967, and I was absolutely amazed. I had already taken LSD, but for me and to this moment, DMT is just the most amazing thing in the universe. It shouldn't exist. It's impossible. And every time I do it, I come down, I say, this is impossible. To call that a drug? What a joke. It just masquerades as a drug. It's not a drug. That's preposterous. The problem with DMT is its incredible power, that only the most intrepid can form any coherent impression whatsoever of what's going on if it's a strong trip. There are sub-threshold trips where you just graze the tummy of the beast, and then people come down with various models of archetypal closure with the cosmic carnival. That's the archetype of DMT, is the cosmic circus. But if you actually get a strong hit of it, which is in no way dangerous, but simply a true boundary dissolving hit, it's into some place. It's almost like, I once said, there's danger of death by astonishment. And I think that's true. That's the major danger, is death by astonishment. Because you just get in there and you say, my God, I thought I had some expectation of what was possible. But I went to it first as an art historian, and I was a Jungian. And I thought, what does this say about the archetypes? There is no archetype for this. Human spiritual experience never got this deep, never tore open this doorway. And yet what? It's a long toke away for an ordinary human being. How could something that beautiful and cosmic and alien be kept secret? when what we do is we seek in all corners, in all times and places, for the bizarre, the outre, the unthinkable, you name it. Well, then, here is this thing which is like the absolute quintessence of what all those things are aiming for. You know, more stunning than the rise of Atlantis from the Atlantic seaboard is a toke of DMT. More appalling than the arrival of alien star fleets in the skies of our planet. And yet, it's here. It's here. And I don't often invoke it. I mean, for me to talk about it is to invoke it. What I had hoped for from ayahuasca was my brother and I, when we got into this DMT stuff, we said, we've got to slow down this movie. I mean, you get in there for about 70 seconds, the first 35 of which is taken up with you checking all your meters to make sure you're not dead. That's what you assume. You know, you say, I did it, I'm dead, fuck it, I'm dead. And chest rising and falling, thoughts continuing in linear apparently I'm not dead. Apparently I'm something else. Well, then by the time you sort it out, you're usually coming down. And people come down babbling, raving. I mean, I've seen, you know, people who've headed mega corporations, people who are accustomed to ordering hundreds of people around, just completely come apart because it is so unexpected. So our notion was slow the movie down, get in there. And ayahuasca looks like a strategy for doing that. And we couldn't imagine, you know, can people wearing penis sheaths and painting themselves with red ochre, and they have this, and this is what they're doing? And then it makes the whole notion of history seem crazy. I mean, we're primitives because we diddle around with atom smashers and stealth bombers and stuff like that. And these people have this other thing. So of course they don't wear clothes, build. Would you? You know? And from 25 years of dealing with this, our strategy was right. Ayahuasca will let you in to these places, and so will psilocybin. What I've decided, what I'm interested in is a very tiny subset. I'm only interested as a phenomenologist. I'm interested in this very circumscribed area in organic nature because it's not supposed to be there, folks. It's like a doorway into the previous universe or something. DMT is half the world. The shiny, bright, active, exfoliating, and bizarre part. Well, then, we then are poised in this strange dimension of diminished possibility. I mean, one can play a reductionist game and say that the human brain mind system is an alarm clock, DMT is a hammer. Hit the alarm clock with the hammer and you learn all about gears because they spring out and become visible. And this is how science works. This is the scientific method. Smash it, then count the pieces. Well, obviously, that's not going to take us too far in this domain because it's entirely made up of structure. I keep trying to reconnect this back into the human world. But I don't know whether that can be done. The shamans that I have gotten really close to have not been, they were able to cure people, but they had no pretension of spiritual accomplishment. They weren't even interested in that. They were interested in what they would call understanding, the same thing which drives a scientist. I mean, Don Fidel, who I took most of my ayahuasca with, we would take it on Saturday nights with a group of about 40 people and cure. And then we would take it on Wednesday nights, just he and I or a couple of other people. And that was, it's cook it up, try it out, try and make sense of it with your friends. The world's religions and spiritual traditions is to say everybody has a piece of the answer. You know, the Buddhists have a piece, the Kabbalists have a piece, everybody has a piece. The mushroom says nobody has a piece. It's just preposterous. You know, the reason the world doesn't make sense to you is because the world doesn't make sense to you. How could it? I mean, look where you're starting from. Where is it writ that troops of monkeys should comprehend the architectonics of the cosmos? It's just not part of the deal. I somehow think that the forced evolution of language is how we're going to work our way back into taking care of our planet, and that psychedelics are the catalyst for this. They show us, number one, that there is a transcendent other, which I certainly didn't believe there was till I took psychedelics. That lasted 15 seconds into the first DMT trip, and then that had been vaporized for all time. I don't think you're going to spend very long involved with these things at a deep level without scaring your socks off eventually. I mean, one of the great things about these psychedelic teachers is that they are so gentle with beginners. And then the flip side of that coin is they are so unforgiving with veterans. And, why shouldn't I have difficult trips? The totality is in such a weird state of turmoil. I mean, you couldn't pay me to take 5 grams of mushrooms in the present circumstances simply because I can feel the riptides in the historical dimension. Fear is a problem because, well, there are different reasons, but here's a reductionist reason. These compounds are CNS stimulants, and that means they're going to stimulate what's called the fight or flight reflex in the hind brain. One of the hardest things I think you have to learn to do is to discipline the hind brain, to sit in a full lotus position, absolutely petrified with fear and not do anything about it, except breathe and sing. Fear comes like a wind out of the desert, and it blows through you. And all you can do is let it blow itself out. And you really can do this. You just wait. Fear is agitation of the organism that chemically cannot maintain itself very long. So wait it through. Then in terms of practical suggestions, sing. You must sing. You have to oxygenate your body. You have to begin moving energy through your body. You can sing your way out of most situations. That's the best advice. And you can breathe your way out of most situations. It takes courage. And courage is not something that is demanded of us very much in the modern world. Courage, where we actually determine to do something that feels dangerous or challenging to us, and then doing it, we don't do. And especially boundary dissolving challenges. The macho type will, climb El Capitan, jump out of airplanes. But strangely enough, those macho types are sometimes the most reluctant to just sit quietly in their living room on 5 dried grams, because it's a different kind of surrender. It's a surrender to something penetrating, and you don't have to. Surrender is the opposite reflex to conquest. It's very hard to get inside somebody else's experience, especially when it's culture-bound. For purposes of operational efficiency, I just have long ago decided nothing works but drugs. And it causes a lot of friction. I mean, that's the hard way of putting it. It's really nothing works but plants. I put in a lot of time trying, breath control and all these things and reading the literature, and I'm just not convinced that they're getting it. The literature doesn't reflect it. The mystical literature in all times and places tends toward effulgence or something, the white light, and that what is revealed is a dimension of incredible complexity. I love multiplicity. I mean, I love nature, which to me means multiplicity. I'm an insect collector, for God's sake. It's for me all in the details. That's what I love, the richness, the texture of it. It's a troubling question for people because people want to be told that there's another way to get to it, and there may be, but it's unbelievably difficult, unbelievably uncertain, very hard to recognize. The mind-brain system can be thought of as like an automobile, in the sense that there are always fuel efficiency modifications that are possible to imagine, which would make the whole system work better. Serotonin is the molecule that is being competed. The drug molecule is more efficient. It obviously is. That's why it has a greater affinity for the bond site than the endogenously produced neurotransmitter. The mundane demands of day-to-day life and evolution, the need to be ever on the alert for attack, it has led us to evolve a neurological style of chemical suppression of consciousness. This flavor of human brain soup could be changed for a different flavor in which we walked around with a much larger awareness. I think that what I see as characteristic of psychedelic people and psychedelic communities is a kind of tendency to go for the big picture. That awareness of the big picture could probably be mapped onto what is ordinarily called an awareness of Tao. It's that you don't get down into the little stuff, and that feeds back into the personality as permission to relax. You know, you're neither pushing the river nor pulling the river. It goes in its good time, and you always seem to be comfortable and there with it. See, this logos, this vegetable mind that I keep referring back to, it may be nothing more than the voice of our own DNA. But whatever it is, when we do not have it guiding us and cultivated within our personality, then it becomes all up to the ego to figure out. And the ego is a frightened, pathetic, grasping creature and will make a mess of it, you may be sure. As far as DMT is concerned,
hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs for this. The great problem is that people will cough or not be able to hold it in. You take 2 hits. Now, many people miss the point because after 2 hits, you feel completely peculiar. You feel as though your body is undergoing some strange kind of anesthesia. All the air has been pumped out of the room. At that point, people say, whoa, wow, it's really coming on strong. And then what you have to do is you have to take one more enormous hit. And this separates the intrepid from the casual, believe me. And then these colors begin racing together, and it forms this mandalic, floral thing, which I call the chrysanthemum. If it doesn't give way, then you didn't do enough. You have to do more, one more hit. Well, then what happens is it like physically propels you through this chrysanthemum-like thing. There's this defined sense of bursting through something, a membrane. And on the other side, and this is now, remember, my experience, on the other side, as you break through, there's a cheer. There's a whole bunch of entities waiting on the other side. It's those gnomes. And you burst into this space, and they're saying, how wonderful that you're here. You come so rarely. We're so delighted to see you. One of the things about DMT that's really puzzling is, in a sense, it doesn't affect your mind. For instance, if you take ketamine, the first thing you notice, the very first thing you notice before the trip hits, is you notice that you no longer are anxious about having taken ketamine. It's doing something to the judgmental machinery. DMT doesn't lay a hand on the judgmental machinery.
you break through into that space exactly who you were before breaking through. Heartbeat, normal. Pulse, normal. Everything's normal. Yeah, everything's normal. Oh, God. Because these things are there, and they're hammering at you. And they come forward. They're like jeweled, self-dribbling basketballs. And there are many of them. And they come pounding toward you, and they will stop in front of you and vibrate. But then they do a very disconcerting thing, which is they jump into your body. They jump into your body, and then they jump back out again. And the whole thing is going on in this very high-speed mode where you're being presented with thousands of details per second, and you can't get a hold on what's happening. And these things are saying, don't abandon yourself to amazement, which is exactly what you want to do. You just want to go nuts with how crazy this is. They say, don't do that. Pay attention to what we're doing. Well, what are they doing? Is they're making objects with their voices. But what they do is they offer things to you. Say, look at this, look at this. And as your attention goes toward these objects, you realize that what you're being shown is impossible. But these things are like the toys that are scattered around the nursery inside a UFO or something. Celestial toys. And the toys themselves appear to be somehow alive. So what's happening is there's just this proliferation of elf gifts. And the elf gifts are moving around, singing, and the whole thing is directed toward, they're saying, do what we are doing. They say, do it, do it, do it. And you feel like a bubble inside your body that's beginning to move up toward your mouth. And when it comes out, it isn't sound, it's vision. You discover that you can pump stuff out of your mouth by singing, and they're urging you to do this. They say, that's it, keep doing it. And, we're now at minute 4.5 with this stuff. And you speak in a kind of glossolalia. It's sort of, he ding wow wak saptivi muldektipi tingetek. And this is accompanied by a do it, do it, do it. And then after a minute or so of this, the whole thing begins to collapse in on itself. And they literally begin to physically move away from you. And usually their final shot is, say, déjà vu, déjà vu. So then you come down. And you're now at minute 6 to 7. And you come down, and it's like being more loaded than you've ever been. It's like about a 700 mic acid trip. But you embrace it as totally down. You say, I'm totally down. I mean, you look like a termite from Arcturus, and the room is decorated in Amish quilts, but I'm completely back. And for a minute or a minute and a half or so, the room just comes right back together. 4 minutes after that, some people can give no account of it whatsoever. They just say, I don't know. It was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me, and I can't remember it now.